Its collection includes dynamite used to blast mines, a 35-ton steam engine from 1895, and an interactive exhibit on gold panning. But one object here looks like it belongs not in a mine, but in outer space.
This object is 12.7 feet tall and weighs 1,800 pounds. It has a cylindrical shape, and it looks like a caged metal tube.
This curious contraption recalls a harrowing rescue that captivated the world.
This is a story of tragedy, ingenuity, and a fight for survival.
In 2010, Copiapo, Chile. This remote village, nestled in the foothills of the Andes Mountains, is home to a thriving copper mine. On the morning of August 5th, a crew of 33 miners is digging almost half a mile below ground. It appears to be a normal day, when all of a sudden, disaster strikes. A terrifying rumble reverberates throughout the mine.
This was every miner's worst nightmare. That kind of crash would suggest a massive collapse somewhere in the mine.
Clouds of debris fill the air. Fearing they'll be buried under the rubble, the men race to the mine's safety shelter. A 540 square foot enclosure stocked with emergency rations. Minutes later, the deafening rumble abates. Once the dust settles, the miners carefully step outside the shelter and search for a way out. But it seems their ordeal has just begun. To their horror, they discover that the only route to the surface has caved in, and all communication has been cut off.
They are trapped. They must have felt absolute terror that their worst fears had been realized.
The miners desperately try to signal for help by generating as much noise as they can.
They honked horns, banged machinery, and even detonated dynamite, so rescuers would know they were trapped down there.
But there's no response. And as the hours stretch into days, their outlook grows bleak.
There are 33 men, and they have no idea how long they're going to be in the mine.
The miners do their best to stretch out the emergency provisions of food and water.
They rationed the available food so that each miner only had a couple of mouthfuls every other day.
But 2 weeks after the collapse, there's still no sign of rescue.
You can imagine morale in the mine would be dwindling. The miners faced death by starvation.
It's 2010, Copiapo, Chile. 33 miners have been trapped for 2 weeks underground after the mine they were working in collapsed. Now, they're on the brink of death and have lost all hope of survival. But little do they know, there's a team working desperately to find them.
On the surface, the rescuers have no idea if the miners made it to the emergency shelter and are still alive. So they search for the shelter by boring exploratory drills deep into the ground. The first 7 attempts are unsuccessful. But then, as they remove the 8th drill, they notice something attached to the tip.
The miners attached a note to the drill, letting the rescuers above know that they were safe. The note read, "We are well in the shelter, the 33." Finally, they knew that the miners were alive.
But finding the men was the easy part. Getting them out will be a monumental task. The only way to reach the men is to drill a tunnel from the surface into the safety shelter. But with the mine still unstable, drilling too wide a tunnel could risk another collapse. The team needs a device that will fit in a narrow opening and protect the miners during their journey to the surface. So they turn to an unlikely group for help: NASA.
NASA put together a task force of scientists from 10 centers to work on the problem.
The team comes up with a bold solution: a narrow craft that can lift the miners out one by one.
The lives of 33 men are dependent on this rescue capsule.
2 months after the initial collapse, the device is finally ready. The completed vessel is a steel cage that is shaped like a torpedo. It's 13 feet tall and just 21 inches across. And to help it navigate the rugged 2,300-foot-long hull, it has a unique feature.
They added rollers to reduce friction with the tunnel walls. That way they could lower and raise the capsule smoothly.
The engineers give the machine a fitting name:
They named the capsule Phoenix, the mythical bird that rises from its ashes.
On October 13th, the Phoenix rescue capsule is slowly lowered into the mine. Hundreds of people, including the press and members of the miners' families, gather at the surface to watch.
Everyone above ground waits anxiously to see what will happen.
Finally, an hour after the Phoenix was lowered into the tunnel, the tiny craft emerges with one of the exhausted but exhilarated miners safely inside.
The first miner was welcomed with a thunderous applause. It was pandemonium.
Over the next several hours, the Phoenix makes 32 more trips to retrieve the other miners. After 69 days underground, all 33 men are brought back to the surface alive.
This rescue was the first of its kind and a day that history will remember forever.
Today, a full-scale replica of the Phoenix capsule remains on display at the Western Museum of Mining and Industry. It's a triumph of technology, international cooperation, and the resilience of the human spirit.